Mr. Rainwater,
Hey, Joe.
were you rushing or dragging?
Oh, God.
The anxiety of that scene fucks with me every single time because I have been there in various educational circumstances.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things where you just don't know, or maybe you do know, but your brain just can't, is in like such a heightened state of fear. It can't process the question or even what a acceptable answer might be.
Yeah. I felt like I had those moments when I was trying to figure out what the fuck the word dynamic was supposed to mean in art school, where I was just like, what is this? Like, what am I supposed to do with this?
So today we're talking about Whiplash. We are going full podcast and just two dudes talking about a movie. But hopefully we'll be a little bit more insightful than the usual pollution of the internet. Mr. Rainwater, you actually threw out this idea. Now, granted, I am the one that inceptioned this into your brain to watch this movie, but you threw it out as a talking point.
You did, damn it.
I'm curious to know what your thoughts were on it, because I'm going to just let anyone listening for a first time in, or if I haven't said this enough for our longtime listeners, there was a phrase that I used to constantly shout at you when we lived together in college, which was, "You are a horse." Meaning, every time I turned around, Rainwater was working. He was either in his room working, or he was at a one of the buildings for our college working.
Oh, yeah.
It was constant work.
Crazy. Yeah.
So,
no, it was... Go on.
For you, someone who I see as a workhorse, and I think you still are to this day just because of the way you talk about some stuff sometimes, the amount of work that it seems that this movie is talking about, like it's one of the themes discussed, is, you know, putting in all the hard work and almost, to some extent, shunning a quote-unquote normal life in an attempt for greatness. I'm curious to know your take on all of this, because you do work very hard, or I don't know if hard is the right word, because that makes you sound untalented. You work long hours. Like, I feel like you are a bit of a perfectionist, or at least you do chase perfection to some extent when you do your art. Not that almost every single artist doesn't, but I mean, the big talking point of this movie is about standards. Right? Because Andrew talks about at one point, the worst thing that someone can say to an artist is "good job," like almost like saying "good enough." You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I'm curious to know your thoughts on this movie in general.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting when we were talking about Damien Chazelle more than a couple weeks back. But you had talked about how this was a theme that came up pretty frequently in his movies, which was that. Chasing, one of the major themes is that chasing like that dream of becoming an artist or becoming better as an artist is an isolating experience to a certain extent. And there's that scene that happens in Whiplash where, like, for a while they're trying to develop, you see this potential relationship develop between the main character and this girl he's going out on dates with, right?
Yep.
And then he just, like, after he has the moment where he realizes, like, what his teacher is, like, trying to get out of him, he breaks up with her pretty immediately and has this very, like, blunt conversation about, like, look, here's what's going to happen is I'm going to be consumed by what I'm trying to do because I want to be the best drummer, and I'm not going to be paying attention to what's going on with your life, and you're going to resent me for it. So I'd rather we just, stop it right here and move on, And, clearly she's like, well, you're fucking crazy. Like, what are you doing, And I think it's interesting because on a certain level, he is talking about something, and that scene is about something that a lot of artists go through, where they are going to spend a lot of hours by themselves because they have to have that space. that time to concentrate and to spend towards himself. With the main character in Whiplash, it's a little bit of a. It reminded me a lot of art school, because I probably spent maybe 11-hour days every day, most days of the week. Doing projects, doing homework. I mean, there was a point where I guess this was probably senior year, where I was doing like my senior project. I was doing 2 other classes, right? And on top of that, I was making short comics, like just because, to get as much stuff out there as I could. And it was all a blur because I don't remember doing anything else. Like, it was doing that, listening to music or listening to talk radio. And something that happens in that movie is you see him, like, he's already a good drummer. Here's the other thing. He's already a really good drummer, but the teacher, and we'll get into this later because I want to talk about this, the teacher for whom he's trying to aspire towards his attention is trying to get him on this level where you don't even know what that level is because it's so nuanced and it's so particular and it's so like of a higher stature, quote unquote, that he's drumming to the point that like his hands are bleeding and stuff. Like he's having to develop calluses. Obviously that's something that most musicians in general have to go through.
Sure.
Like, something that I've learned a lot about music in general, and especially with jazz, is like you basically have to condition your body to be able to meet the needs of the music you're performing, which is it's a wild idea for me because it's like,
yeah,
I've had to we've talked about this. I've had to condition my body to be able to deal with work hours. But not to that kind of,
insanity.
Not to what that movie portrays. Yeah, exactly. So anyway, it was a really long ramble to sort of get to the point of like, I think that it is necessary to push yourself, right? If you're going to become a better artist, to do the things that you want to do also. So like for me, somebody who draws, like, in order for me to get to a point where I can meet my own expectations and meet my own vision, I have to constantly practice and improve on what I'm doing. In this situation, and within this movie, it's a little bit different because he's trying to meet the expectations of another person. And at least in the movie, I get the sense that he's not entirely sure what the fuck those expectations are. And what are your thoughts in regards to that, Joe?
I mean, it's a very, like you said, it's a very nuanced in terms of how they approached it, because Fletcher, which is J.K. Simmons, is very, I don't want to say wishy-washy, but he misleads him quite often.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like the scene before he puts him onto the kit to drum in the studio band. They're talking outside in the hallway, and he kind of invades his personal space a little bit by, putting his hand on his wall over his shoulder. But then he's just like, "Hey man, this is all good, man. Just have fun." Blah 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 blah. And then the next second, he's in there screaming in his face in a way that only J.K. Simmons can do, and insulting him and demeaning him. Do you know what I mean? Like,
oh, and more so insulting him and demeaning him using the information that he gathered during that conversation in the hallway.
Yes. Saying mommy left because you weren't talented and all this kind of stuff. Like, he's literally like a voice of depression almost.
Yeah.
And it's insane, but it's interesting to see how that they used him, because then at the end of the film, spoiler alert, they both kind of come to terms with each other. Like, you know what I mean? Like where they're on not equal ground, but an equal understanding. And that was what the journey was starting off as just a guy himself with a drum kit and then part of this band, but also on like perfect time. Do you know what I mean? Like he's been put through the ringer by this guy, and then an opportunity presents itself, and it's like the final test, and he blows it, but then he's been through so much that it's like, no, I haven't blown it. Like, I'm going to keep going. And it's almost like if you symbolically looked at it, it's like a guy facing his depression personified and beats his depression by just keep going, because he could have very well just left that concert hall at the end of the movie because he didn't know the songs that they did and he embarrassed himself in front of everybody and all that. But he said, no, fuck this. He went back out, he sat down, and he just started drumming and showing, no, this is me. I'm fucking great. And Fletcher just kind of gets on board with it. It's very interesting to me because I don't know if as all great movies should, I don't know if Andrew would have been that way when the movie started. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and I gotta say, like, that ending, I haven't seen too many movies in a while where there was an ending that just sort of left me, like, in a lot of different states, right?
Yeah.
Because my opinions about the character of Fletcher are really influenced by personal experiences in my life. Because, like, I have to say, like, it's written by Damien Chazelle, right?
I believe so, yeah.
He does a really good job of writing a character that I would, based on personal experiences, define as like a narcissist, like pure narcissistic personality disorder.
Andrew or Fletcher?
Fletcher.
Okay.
Although Andrew, you could easily argue, has some narcissistic issues himself.
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
But Fletcher's like full on, like, almost predatory in the way that he uses his power over his students. Mm-hmm. And you find out in the movie pretty quickly, or not that quickly, but you do find out at a certain point in the movie where, like, he's had a student commit suicide, right?
Right.
And, like, Fletcher has an emotional connection to it in the sense that, like, he appreciated that student, he misses that student, but cannot make, like, the emotional connection that he has a certain responsibility in that. You know what I mean? Like, because it's made very clear in the movie that he treats all of the students like shit. Mm-hmm. And that is his, like, teaching technique. And he gives, like, a motivation for it and all this other stuff. It's pretty easy to argue, I think, in reality, that somebody like that would be fired pretty quickly. And it's played up in the movie that, you know, I mean, he does get fired, actually, in the movie. You know, like, that's the ultimate, to me, that's the ultimate tension of that story. Is, like, what is the cost of becoming a great artist? And is that cost worth it? Because clearly, like, if you look at what Fletcher's motivation is as a character, he thinks of himself as, like, he is trying to create a garden that will bring about these great artists from his fire. From another perspective, though, I would say he's, you know, that's insane. Like,
you could say he's doing the opposite. He's destroying artists.
Yeah, exactly. And, like, who's to say that, like, Andrew couldn't have also achieved that greatness on his own by just fucking playing in bands and not dealing with that kind of abuse? Mm-hmm. So, like, that ultimately for me was sort of the thought that came to my mind, is just, like, in the sense of, like, trying to reflect on Andrew's character, where I was like, well, if I was fucking Andrew, I would just be like, I know I'm a good drummer. I need to just go find bands who need a good drummer instead of trying to appeal to this fucking douchebag who is so, like, so particular in what he wants that I don't even know if I'm ever going to accomplish it. I don't even know if it's real, if it's just a mechanism of control. Because there's another argument to be made at the end of the movie too, like, you know, when Andrew starts that song and is like, "Hey, just follow my lead." Ultimately, what it becomes about, and when he accomplishes what he's trying to get, which is on one level Fletcher's attention, on another level be a great drummer. But when Fletcher actually like presumes control, reasserts control over Andrew as a drummer, right? Because he's given his hand motions and all that stuff. Like, that's what Fletcher wants. That's what Fletcher's like seeking the whole time in that movie. And his tools for doing that are like using his forms of derogation and using his forms of like, you know, I know what buttons to push to set you into an emotional like disturbance so I can get you to do what I want. So for me, like, that's hard for me because I was in like a long-term relationship with somebody like that who knew what kind of buttons to push on me and would use them pretty repeatedly to like get me to do things that they wanted. And so it's hard for me. Like, that was one of the things that made that movie hard for me to watch because it was very like
a PTSD type thing.
Well, it was just like reminding me of that. You know, it's not. On the other hand, it's also like what's that word? Fucking cathartic. It's also cathartic in the sense that like I can recognize those patterns of behavior. I can see them. And I can be in that position of like, oh, fuck, Andrew, just get out of that. Just go. Just leave, you know? So that's why I find myself so just I'm caught, like, in this paradox with the ending of that movie. Because, like, at the same time, it's really obvious that Andrew does achieve a certain, like, a better level as a drummer.
Excuse me.
And so I think that's all I have at the moment, Joe.
Well, I'm curious to know as an artist, what did you take away anything from the movie that you would be like, you know, not necessarily talking thematically, I'm talking just about like technique or any kind of storytelling execution or tropes or things like that you may have picked up on that you're like, that was really good. I see what Damien did there. I think I can use that somehow. Was there anything that like stuck out to you?
It's such an incredibly like well-made film storytelling wise. That's the thing, is like it's such a well put together movie that I don't even think about all the mechanisms that make it work. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I'm just thinking about the themes, and I'm thinking about like the scenes, and just like the pacing in that movie is like really, it gives
you whiplash.
It's kind of perfect. Like, it's kind of a perfectly paced movie. Because there's not like, when you think about it, it's not like an action film. Like, the whole movie is like set up on scenes of like people playing music and conversation. That's pretty, I mean, there's like one big scene of like Andrew gets in a car wreck, right?
Right.
And leading up to that, you know, it's you start to feel like, oh God, what is going to happen here? Because he's like late for this venue, right? And he's just like clearly not in a good headspace. And I'm trying to remember how that scene goes, but I want to say it's almost like it's a longer take, right? And you're kind of, he's just like he's getting on the road, he's going, and then there's that immediate just like,
it's very much shot like a Jason Bourne movie.
Yeah.
Where it's like very shaky, handheld camera, very close. Oddly enough, it's a really low angle.
Yeah.
And then it only kind of gets a little bit higher right before the car accident, which, you know, I don't know if it was the first one to do it, but it's the only one that sticks out in my mind where they have that, like a car crash scene that just comes out of nowhere. I know there's like a movie with Julianne Moore that does the same thing, but I don't know if they came out after or before this, but like that was really great storytelling because that's something that doesn't need to be set up. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like, oh, there's a car coming. Oh no. Like, a fucking car crash under those circumstances where he wasn't focusing on. I mean, he's on the phone when it happens, and he's driving chaotically, but it's the fact that he forgot his sticks, and the other guy's gonna take his thing, and this guy's been screaming at him, and we've been through everything that's gone on in the movie, and you're not thinking about anything. So like I'm one of those people that can argue people can hold a phone and drive their car and be completely capable. Like the idea that someone is distracted while on their phone is entirely based on the person. Like I feel like anybody who's older than 35 probably can't do that, but anyone who's 35 or younger probably is fine. You know what I mean? Like it's just a thing that you're capable of doing these days. But the fact that you throw in more of those distractions of what's going on, that is in itself the setup of that scene, is all that chaos that's going on, just to get him back in that seat, a bloody fucking mess, to demonstrate how determined he is to do this. And you know, it's almost like I think they call it Stockholm syndrome, where where you become like friends with your captor? And
yeah,
basically Fletcher is a captor, like a teacher or a professor here has these people held hostage, these kids in this band, and they are so determined to please him, to meet his requirements, to do all this. And it's not about, like, at no point do they make it about grades, which I love. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's not about those stakes. It's about something higher. It's about a personal fulfillment, which a lot of artists can feel. Like, that's, like, I could give a shit less about, you know, what my Rotten Tomato score ends up being. But if I'm happy with where I am, and, like, you know, society as a whole looks at my art and says, that is a great movie, that is a great work, then I'm happy. Like, I feel fulfilled. And that's really what the stakes become with it, because from moment one, literally, like you were talking about the pacing, the first scene in the movie, there is no quote unquote setup. The very first scene in the movie is Andrew drumming, and Fletcher walks in on him and he starts testing him right from the go. He's measuring him to see how good he can do. He's already setting up this weird dynamic between the two of them, where Andrew can't give the right thing no matter what he does. Do you know what I mean? He's like, well, why did you stop drumming? And then Andrew starts drumming again. Did I ask you to start drumming again? Like, there's nothing that, it doesn't matter if he didn't start drumming again. If he gave an answer, Fletcher's answers would have changed. It would have been, you know, why didn't you start drumming? Like, why did you answer me? Like, and that's the unease that gets set up right away, because I've had that relationship with a teacher where it's like, no matter what you do, they knock you on your ass. And it's almost like, yes, it is abusive. It is abusive. But sometimes, I don't know, I feel like people need to be abused. I realize that's like a horrible thing to say, but I feel like, well, I mean, because I think you'll be the first person to agree with me. Comfort is one of, and it's not like a good job or good enough, but comfort is a threat to artistry.
Yeah.
And you know what I mean? Like, artistry needs to be scary. It needs to be something new, something challenging, something that comes from something primal. And one of the most primal things that everybody feels is fear, uncertainty. You know what I mean? Like, and that could, like, he could have found things that his artists love and you know, tried to help them really blossom those things, but he went the other way. And that's kind of, it's almost like a stylistic thing to me, that he just chose abuse and that was what worked.
Well, it's interesting too, because within that framework too, it's like Fletcher's reputation is dependent on how his students perform.
Yep.
Right. So, like, they reflect his choices that he's making on the people who are performing in his bands. And, you know, he obviously looks at his taste, his sense of tempo, his sense of, you know, timing within music to be perfect.
Mm-hmm.
And so he demands that everybody else aligns to that, right?
Well, he is the band leader, so he does have that right.
Right. It's one of those things where it's like, yeah, ultimately, like, you look at what Andrew's doing, it's all his choice. It's all his complicity, right, and all that stuff.
True.
For lack of a better word at the moment. And for whatever reason, right, because it's not like Fletcher's the only fucking, like, band leader in that conservatory.
Sure.
Right? But he's the one that he picked, that Andrew picks, to be representative of, like, his values. So it says a lot about Andrew then. And it says a lot about maybe what, and this is why I was saying earlier, like, you know, Andrew probably has some issues with a sense of narcissism that he's working through too, in the sense that he's willing to, like, throw away a blossoming romantic relationship for, you know what I mean? Very easily willing to throw it away. There's the conversation with his now, granted, this is like...
I was about to get there. I was going to get there and ask you about that, because I wanted to challenge you a little bit.
There's the conversation that he has with his family at the dinner table, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which was a scene that, you know, I haven't had conversations like that ever with my family, because they're not... I don't have that kind of dynamic, but, like, it's one where, like, his cousins and his uncle are, like, kind of degrading, like, his choices, right, to be a drummer.
Yes.
And they're basically, I mean, during that conversation or during that scene, they're basically just, like, you know, trying to talk up the things that they're doing, and he's trying to talk up the things that he's doing. And I think it was, like, football, right? Like, he has a cousin who's, like, a football player or whatever.
Yeah.
And he's trying to, like, be like, oh, you know, why is that such a big fucking deal, you know?
Yeah.
Like, his dad gets involved and is like, well, what are you trying to do here, son? And he's like, well, I can't remember quite how the scene goes, but it's like, basically he's like, well, I think what I'm trying to do to be the greatest drummer ever, which is basically what he was saying, you know, is a higher goal than what the rest of my family is, like, you know, paying attention to. What were you going to say in regards to that, Joe?
Well, I mean, it's established right off the bat in the movie, right after he meets Fletcher and he goes to the band for his quote unquote normal band. That he's very observant, which I give props to, because every artist I feel is overly observant. Like, he's noticing foot taps, he's overhearing conversations a little farther away about himself, or about him, that he probably shouldn't be able to hear, but he's focused in on it. And, like, there's little things that he's just noticing, and that's just setting him up that he's very noticeable. Or he's very observant, I should say. And then when it gets to that dinner scene, he starts that fight, that whole argument, because
you're right.
They kind of wrap up the discussion about him, and then they turn to the cousins, and the cousins like, oh yeah, scored a 94-yard touchdown and blah blah blah, and they're all very happy and talking, and then he just kind of abruptly interrupts and goes, it's Division 3. Like, it's not even Division 2, it's Division 3, which kind of starts that fight, and then he goes into that, it goes into that that back and forth about what constitute greatness. You know what I mean? Like, you're not going to be in the NFL, but I might be dead in an alleyway, doped up from heroin and alcohol and broke, but people will still talk about me one day. Like, to some extent, the way I kind of look at that scene is that he is so egotistical, right? Because we were talking about that, like the ego that exists in him and how he thinks he's great, or he knows that he is great. But the thing that I kind of got away from that in terms of him allowing Fletcher to do what he did to him was that observance ability that Andrew has, is that he realizes he's so great that maybe his ego is like telling him, you're not going to get better than this on your own. So that's why he allows Fletcher to do all this to him, is because he won't inflict any more damage on himself. Like, he can't. Like, he's hit that ceiling of, this is where I'm capable of going, or pushing myself. If I need to go further past this point, I need to stand in front of the truck. I need to, jump off the building and see if I can fly. Like, it was it's that kind of dichotomy that he's kind of seeking out and allowing happen to him because, as we talked about, he gets the calluses from drumming on his hands. It's the same symbolism. He's hurting himself because he knows it's going to make him stronger. It will heal and he'll be better and stronger because of it. So his relationship with Fletcher, to me, is the exact same thing. Fletcher hurts him, and then he can get stronger because of whatever Fletcher throws at him. And it's just that back and forth of hurt me, then I heal, then I'm better. Hurt me again. All right, now I'm hurt. Now I'm going to get better. Like, it keeps repeating itself and repeating itself. Yeah. And he has this kind of idea that, that's what's going to push me from now on. It's like, I can't push myself any further than I already am. It's almost like, and when he's talking about the football thing, it's like, well, we're in Division 3. You're not being challenged by the best. You're not moving up to the best. You're not moving up to Division 2 or Division 1. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
you will only get this far because other people will let you. So, we'll hold you to that point, because I don't think a football player can choose what division they end up going to, or the team in general. You know what I mean? Like, I think they're just stuck in whatever. I don't know. But like, they can't sign up for it. They have to be chosen. Whereas with this, I guess he was kind of chosen, but he also has the ability to say, oh, this isn't for me. Like, I'll go somewhere else. So he allows that pain to be subjected on him. So where you were talking before about, he is complicit in it. He is absolutely a sadist in that mind. You know what I mean? Like, he's pretty much, he's begging for it from Fletcher, and Fletcher's happy to give it to him. And that's kind of what I see from that. So when I see that scene at the dinner table where he's going off on his cousins about how terrible or how pathetic and, how normal they will be and end up or whatever like that, being like PTA people and stuff like that. That to me isn't so much about his ego as much as it is about revealing about how he sees himself and how he's approaching his path. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I the other thing that I was thinking about is it is sort of like a mutuals attract each other kind of thing.
Yeah.
Because it's like Fletcher clearly saw something in Andrew that he was like, okay, this kid seems like he wants my attention that much. He's malleable. He's willing to work for it in this way. Like, for instance, there's a whole like scene where he's basically like bringing in, I think there's a point where it's like, because Andrew starts off as like an understudy, right, for a drummer in Fletcher's band. And then there's a point where Fletcher brings in an additional person. So there's like 3 people competing for that one position.
Right.
And we find out pretty quick in the movie that Fletcher's doing this just to basically, trying to remember exactly the whole motivation, but I mean basically to like challenge or to throw Andrew off of his guard, or throw Andrew off of his like competency to think that like, this position is guaranteed to. The scene with the when there's like there's 3 people like competing for that one drumming position. Right. Basically.
Okay.
So like Fletcher's like coordinating this, right? Where he's got there's Andrew, and he's the understudy for the drumming position. And then he brings in an additional understudy who was somebody from a previous band that Andrew was practicing in that clearly Andrew doesn't respect as a drummer. He doesn't like look at him highly.
Yeah, not even at all, a little.
And basically Fletcher's trying to, as we find out, Fletcher's trying to put Andrew in this position of realizing like this drumming position that he thinks that he's like got, like it's not guaranteed to him. Which is a pretty consistent theme with his relationship with Fletcher, because Andrew wants to be in that position where it's like, I'm your go-to man if you need a drummer. I'm the person that you're going to go for. And it doesn't, like, Fletcher wants to make it as clear as possible. There is nothing you can do that will make this position guaranteed, because I'm going to go for whoever is better, and it might be you or it might be somebody else, and that's contingent from moment to moment. And like, I don't know.
Well, the only thing he can do to keep that seat is keep working harder.
Right. And well, that's the point, right? Is to keep him on his feet, to keep him in a position of like,
to keep him from getting comfortable.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I'm trying to remember why we originally talked about that scene. I think the point though is Andrew as a character clearly does struggle from this issue of identity as an artist, in the sense that he must, like, it's not said outright in the story at all, but it seems like the only other person in his life that really affirms him as a drummer is his dad. And his dad's kind of like, well, this is the thing that you're doing, hopefully it works out, I don't know. And everybody else is like, I don't get it, right? And Fletcher comes along, he's like the only person that for him is like, oh, he gets it. He gets what I'm about. He gets what I want to do. So I'm going to focus all my attention on him, right? Because like all the other students, they're all in the same position of just like trying to outdo each other, right? And so they're not like in a constructed peer like relationship, because like everything's just like everything between each of them is just completely contingent on whatever the teacher thinks, basically. So
I wonder if there's an alternate movie going on while Andrew's story's going on, where Fletcher's doing the exact same thing to like the trumpets and like.
Well, and that's the implication, right? Because like the student who had committed suicide was a trumpet student, right?
I don't remember what instrument he played, but I'll go with what you're saying.
It was a horn instrument of some sort. I'm going to assume it was trumpet. I don't remember. But the implication there is that he must have gone through the exact same, like, hell that Andrew went through. It is interesting because it's like, what it makes me wonder is like, so what is the motivation? Is it that he picks out particular students at particular times, right? And he finds a particular personality where he's like, okay, that's the one, right? Because like, I don't, not to get back in, I am, but not to get back into psychological terminology and whatever, but like that's a particular move that like people with narcissistic personality do, is they pick scapegoats. So like they pick one person who is the negative that everybody focuses their attention on, and uses that as like a way to make everybody else feel like they're good, they're doing things right, and keep any of the negative attention off of the abusive type personality, right? Because you can always say, oh well, it's his fault, look what he did, look what he's making happen, or whatever. So that makes me wonder, right? Like that makes me wonder about like when as you learn that he has this history, that it wasn't just Andrew, it makes what you're saying like, I guess that's my theory, is like before Andrew there was that horn student, and before that horn student there was probably somebody else. So like it might have not been the entire band, it might have been like he would find another great example actually. So I think this is when Andrew does his first session with them, right? And there was
the guy that he kicks out because he didn't know that his thing was out of tune.
Yeah, exactly. So like that guy might have been the guy that he was focusing on before Andrew came in. And that guy just had the intelligence to just leave and get out of it, right? Or whatever you want to call it. Maybe not intelligence, maybe it was the lack of grit or whatever. But definitely, like, to me, that's how I think about it anyway.
See, I come from a history of, or a background, I should say, of martial arts training, where martial arts has come from the eastern part of the world, and the reason that it came over to America was because military people would pick it up while they were overseas. So when they came back and they taught it, they would kind of mix a lot of the militaryisms with, like, if you watch something like, I don't know if you watch Cobra Kai, if you watch like any kind of martial arts thing or whatever, there's a lot of militarism in there, like standing in the row, standing in straight lines, don't move, don't look, don't breathe, don't question me, do it, like all that kind of stuff, screaming in your face, yelling kind of abusive things, hitting you, physical punishment, things like that. So growing up with this, like I started karate when I was 7. I got my black belt when I was 14. I think I was 14. It was either 12 or 14, somewhere in there. But either way, for a good long chunk, it was definitely 14. I think it took me a while to get there. And the reason for that was because most of the instructors who were there weren't very military-esque about it. They were very, quote unquote, normal people. Like, oh, you're not doing it right. Oh, blah, blah, blah. And they would not focus in on me and be hard on me and push me and this and that. And then eventually a teacher came along who was like that, who was straight up asshole, in my face, screaming, demeaning me, this and that. And that was kind of a wake-up call for me. And that pushed me to become better. And it was something like immediately, like I started becoming like a standout student. Like I was always the kid that got passed over. Everyone that I started doing karate with that was still there at some point that didn't quit got their black belts before I did. Like I always got passed over. I was always the guy that was like slowed down on the progression and stuff until that teacher came along, and that teacher got on my ass, and he was just like, no, you're in the front of the line, you pick it up. No, that's not right, your foot's wrong. No, you didn't get your knee up high enough. No, you didn't block that. No, you didn't do this. No, you didn't turn fast enough. No, you're not breathing right. Like just constantly on me in front of the rest of the class. Like it wasn't like private. It was, it was embarrassing. It was demeaning. Yeah. He was tough on me, but I became one of the best black belts that was there. I became one of the instructors. Then I became one of the school leaders, and then I became a master belt. And like that was the kind of stuff that happened to me. And then I noticed as a teacher, I had to be hard. Like I wasn't Fletcher, but I could be Fletcher on certain days, if that makes sense. Like I could notice, like I could walk in and it could be like a rainy day in October, and it's like the days are getting shorter and the nights are coming sooner and everybody's kind of tired and this and that. And karate class was at night, and I could pick up, like I had that artistry, that instinct where I could read the room instantly, and I could be like, oh, everybody's tired. That rain is dragging everybody down. They want to just go home, eat a nice warm comfort meal, watch some TV, and go to sleep. And that wasn't my job that day. My job was to put them through the ringer because we have a grading coming up in 2 weeks, and they have to be ready and they have to do this. So I was shouting at people. I was nitpicking people. I was doing this. And then other days when it was just like, good weather or whatever like that, we would just have fun. You know what I mean? Like I would be making jokes and doing my normal stuff. And then there's other times where I could see like, oh, a kid had a rough day, or his parent told me, oh, he's getting bullied. My reaction to that was never, oh, pick on this kid some more or try and give him an inspirational speech or nothing like that. But I would, I remember one kid specifically was a comic book nerd, little scrawny kid, and he just couldn't find it in him to throw a punch. And I remember, because I asked him, I'm like, you got to get angry. He's like, I can't get angry. I'm like, you got picked on today and you're not angry about it? He's like, no, I can't get there. And I was like, okay. So I had to find a different way in there. And so like what my thing was is I found out his favorite comic book superhero was Spider-Man. And I literally just told him, I'm like, all right, while you're doing these moves, I want you to just, in your mind, you're not going to tell anybody else, but in your mind, you're Spider-Man, and you're fighting Doc Ock, and you're fighting Green Goblin, and you're fighting the Hulk, and whoever it may be. And suddenly that sparked something in him, and he was able to do the moves with more power. He was able to, you know what I mean? So I came from the school of getting my ass whooped and screamed at and all this kind of stuff like Andrew or Fletcher does to Andrew. But I don't think it's the only tool in the toolbox, if that makes sense.
It sounds like what you're the thing that you do different. You're doing differently is also like kind of reading the room too, like being able to assess like what technique's going to work for who, and also, looking at it in regards to what the weather is and all that stuff. Like, there's a difference between that and the sort of absolutist drill sergeant sort of attitude that Fletcher has, where there's no alternative, there's no other option.
I guess what we're talking about is the art of teaching.
Yeah, and I'm definitely not somebody who is particularly good at teaching or understands how to break through to people in that regard. That is an incredibly nuanced art form, because it's like you have to understand the particular psychological needs of your student. And, with Fletcher, like, he understands psychologically how each student operates in a very in-depth way. But it doesn't matter to him whether or not it hurts. It matters to him whether or not the results happen.
He doesn't adapt.
Exactly.
He is the rock or the hard place. And you either adapt to him or you die. And that's... So the real question I guess I'm proposing is, do you see him as a villain or a almost an anti-hero?
That's why the ending bugs me, because it's like, it's one of those things where it's like, I can't think of too many stories where the villain... I guess I'm giving away what my thoughts are, because I do kind of think of him as the villain, but in a sense, like, as a villain, he does make... it's hard for me to think of Andrew as the hero, quite frankly, but he does make Andrew like a better drummer, right? Because after a while, when I watched that movie, I'm like, well, that's the dynamic they've created together. Yeah. Because Andrew keeps staying in. He returns after not only does he return to Fletcher's like tutelage, but he basically like passively defends Fletcher. Right. When there's a lawyer who's like, hey, we have reason for a case here. Like, because I think Andrew gets expelled or something like that. I can't quite remember. Something happens to where he leaves the conservatorium, right?
He attacks Fletcher at that concert.
That's right. And then a lawyer comes and is like, hey, look, this guy has a history and we have reason for a case. And Andrew's just like, no, I'm not gonna,
which is weird, because not 5 minutes before he was tackling him to the ground, calling him a piece of shit.
But that, I think, to me, what I read in that is like Andrew respects Fletcher based on their shared principles, right? Yeah. That's what it ultimately comes down to, because, after that, like, he has that conversation with him at the bar, and that's when Fletcher gives his whole motivation for why he's a piece of shit. Like, basically he's like, I'm trying to fuel the fire under these guys. I think this is the only way that it can be done, basically, to have like the greatest musicians possible. And so, after hearing all that, it's not like Andrew changes his mind. He's like, yeah. So that's why, to me, it's like, it's hard for me to see it as a hero-villain relationship, because it's like somebody it is like a sadomasochistic relationship, where there's one person who wants to deal out the damage, there's one person who wants to take the damage. And that's ultimately what it becomes about, right? That's what the movie ultimately becomes about. And it's like, if you consent to that, then great, I guess.
Keyword is consent.
Yeah. And, there's every argument to be made in the film that Andrew pretty much consents the whole way.
Yeah, he has moments where he where he flies off the handle, but it's because I almost feel like it's not because he's mad at Fletcher. He's mad at himself for not matching Fletcher's desires. Like he's not he's not hitting what Fletcher wants. He can't reach it, so he takes it out on Fletcher instead of taking it out on himself. Does that make sense? Like when he tackles him, when he argues back, when he does all this stuff. And then I guess you could say at the end of the film, instead of it's the same opportunity where he fucks up in front of a giant crowd that he did when he tackled. And then the difference this time is instead of taking it out on Fletcher, he performs. He just starts performing. You know what I mean? Like
although in that scene, Fletcher sets him up.
Oh, absolutely. There's no doubt about it. Oh, absolutely. And Fletcher deserves every second of getting his ass whooped in that thing. But also, not for nothing, Andrew kind of set Fletcher up for embarrassment when he showed up at the thing, a bloody mess from a car crash, and couldn't perform the stake. You know what I mean? Like, he made Fletcher look like an asshole. So why wouldn't Fletcher want to get, some kind of retribution for that? Because this kid just won't acknowledge where he is or his limits. So it's tough, and you're still dodging the question. Do you see Fletcher as a hero or as an anti-hero or as an antagonist?
He's an antagonist, for sure. He's for sure an antagonist.
But do you think Andrew changes him in that last scene? Is that what redeems him, so to speak? Because
I don't think so.
You could, I mean, if we're looking at the lens of the movie through your lens, you could say Andrew becomes a villain in that last scene.
I would say Andrew is corrupted at the end of the movie to a
that's a good way to
extent.
put it. Yeah.
But it's a weird corruption because he does actually become a better drummer. So it's sort of like there's almost this Faustian sort of theme to the movie where it's like, here's the price you have to pay if you want to become. It's like a deal with the devil at the crossroads. Like, here's the devil you have to make a deal with if you want to become the best drummer.
You have to sacrifice a relationship with somebody. You have to put strains on the only relationship that you have with your father. You have to, demean other people to remind yourself that you are great. You have to bloody yourself physically. You have to, dump on and kick and fight and scratch and claw anyone who's coming for what your spot. Like, if you look at it, the entire movie, he is a downward spiral of him going downwards towards greatness. And greatness lies in hell. Because there's literally no redeeming people next to him. He's pulled up a seat next to Fletcher. And he's great. He's a phenomenal drummer at the end of it. But it's not a punishment, though. That's the weird way that the movie frames it, is that it's not a punishment for abandoning a relationship with this girl, or, embarrassing your father in front of his family, or embarrassing your family, or putting down others that are just trying to go for the same thing you are. Like, he's rewarded in the end of it. And
that's what I like about this story, is it doesn't take a moral stance.
I love stories that do that in general.
Yeah, like it's like, I mean, it's almost like the Inception top, but it's about the theme of the story. Like, you have to decide for yourself, like, is it worth it? Yeah, exactly. But that's an appropriate way to approach that topic, because for some people it isn't worth it, and for others it is, and it does pay off. It's like, I can't remember the name of the jazz artist that Fletcher talks about, but it's
Bird.
He uses this. What's that?
He calls him Charlie Bird.
Yeah. Okay, that's right. He uses this story about how, I think he was a trumpeter or something like that, and like he's using the story about how this jazz artist, the moment at which he became great was like when this drummer basically like almost killed him by like throwing
a cymbal at his head.
Yeah. And basically the idea was like, from that moment on, he just had the fire in him and elevated himself so that he just didn't have, this drummer wasn't throwing shit at his head. And in that sense, once again, I mean, it's a little bit different from what I was saying, because what I'm kind of talking about originally was like this Faustian bargain thing. And in that situation, it's more like, you're just doing what you need to survive, right? You're just doing what you need to stay, to keep from being trampled basically. And it's hard. I don't know. Like, I have a hard time looking at that as the case for Andrew, just because he has so many choices that he could make besides remaining under Fletcher's tutelage. And that's just more of a pinpointing just, his age, his place in the world at his age. Because he's a very believable character to me. I feel like I've been...
Andrew or Fletcher?
Andrew.
Okay.
Fletcher too, but Andrew, I feel like, is a very believable artist character in the sense that I felt like I've been in that seat in my life where I'm just like desperately trying to, get to these new tiers and figuring out what to do to accomplish that. And then, having to come across that like devil at the crossroads sort of moment, right?
But is there a Fletcher in your mind?
Oh yeah.
And then see, that's what I'm getting at. Fletcher exists in me. He's like both Andrew, no pun intended. Andrew and Fletcher both exist within me as an artist.
Sure.
Like I can do it where I'm practicing harder and stuff, and unless I hear myself go, "No, that fucking sucks, you piece of shit. Get back to work. Delete the fuck up and start from scratch, even though you don't want to. Yeah. You have to." And
dude, like the worst of it was when I was in art school. Like you didn't hear it, even though next door I was like yelling at myself. Because like I was going through that with myself for a long time, where I was like angry at myself for not doing the thing that I'm trying to do, right? Like,
be real. It's really Photoshop and Illustrator not keeping up with you. That fucking happens, and you know it because I've done it before. I click on one button and it does the wrong thing. Only now I'm much more friendly with Control Z.
Well, for me, what it was like, it was learning how to draw like three-dimensional objects. Mm-hmm. It was learning how to ink. That was for me like a multiple years long challenge. Because inking's like one of those things like analog, like pen and ink. If you fuck it up, you fuck it up. You really can't go back. So like when you mess up, it is
maddening.
Like I have to start all over from step one. Or I have to or the solution's going to be way more difficult than just erasing it, because you can't erase it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I definitely for a long time had that Fletcher style inner voice, and it's taken a long time to sort of like get to a point where that isn't the intensity level that it's at.
Okay.
Not in the same way.
Do you think your art is better? Or do you think you are better as a person? Like you're much more comfortable, you're much happier.
I'm much happier and more comfortable where I am as a person. I definitely can acknowledge areas in my work where I could get better, and I feel confident that the rate at which I improve is such that I'm not worried about whether or not it's going to happen. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when now.
Okay.
And so, yeah.
That's wisdom.
Well, but that's the thing is like, yeah, do I get frustrated with myself when I'm like, I haven't reached that point yet? Yeah, I do. I definitely do. But I also recognize like, well, I could either abuse myself over it and actually like negatively affect my output, or I can have a friendlier relationship with myself and just have the output, and the output's ultimately the thing that improves the artwork anyway over time.
That's fair.
So that was the compromise I made with myself on that.
Okay. So you made peace with your Fletcher in a way.
In a way.
You put him on decaf. All right, well, we're coming up on an hour. Is there anything else you want to throw out there to anybody listening about Whiplash that you feel like they should know?
I I mean, all I would say now is like, if you are an artist, I recommend watching this movie. I definitely see why Jal recommended it to me. I think that it covers a topic that we all, as artists, come across at some point or another, and we all approach it in different ways.
Mm.
And I think that this movie is almost like a Rorschach test for like, what is your inner composition as a person?
What's
you know?
your kink?
Yeah.
What's your art motivation kink? Are you a masochist? I would definitely say that I am. I enjoy the people who look at something and go, no, that can be better. And you know what I mean? Like that, and I am that asshole when people work with me, for me, however you want to do it, or even just in general, when I critique something, I very seldom say, this is great, and then put a period. Usually there's a but or a follow-up question or something of the nature. You know what I mean? Like, I am never satisfied. And I'm not so much, let's just put it like this. J.K. Simmons has some fucking zingers in this movie that that would make David Goggins look tame. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like ridiculously over the top. Everything is racist, sexist, homophobic, whatever you can think of, he's using to try to get under your skin. I'm a little bit, and this is where I usually call myself that asshole, where, I'm the one that's, nitpicking or, calling out the flaws or whatever's not working. But I am so much more gentle-handed than J.K. Simmons is about it. But I like this movie for that reason, because I actually did feel, like you felt cathartic and a little bit of like trauma returning when you watched it. Me, I felt seen. Like, I felt like I was like, oh, I'm not the only one who feels like this, because in my mind it's Damien Chazelle just illustrating his head. You know what I mean? Like,
sure.
And to me, for someone to get that relationship of Andrew and Fletcher and just personify them through characters, to have one writer write that lets me know that I am not the only person who thinks like that, who has that motivation of screaming at myself in my head. Now, whether or not it's healthy, that's up to other people to decide. But when I have that happen to me, I'm at my most productive. I'm at my best. And my biggest problem, like, I'm going to go ahead and I'll pull an Andrew Neiman right now. I think I am a talented artist. My problem is getting off my ass and getting it done. And that's where it lies, because I can go to Twitter and YouTube and, refresh the news websites all day long. And I have. Like today, I was supposed to be working. Not really. I found every reason not to. I cleaned my office. I took down Christmas lights. Like, I found every reason not to. But tomorrow, I don't have a reason. You know what I mean? Like, I literally got everything done today to procrastinate. So tomorrow, when I'm sitting here, it's going to become that guilt shame factor in my head where it's like, motherfucker, you can watch Cobra Kai that you've watched 27 times the fourth season already. It just came out on Friday. And you've already watched it through so many times. You can watch this at night when you're unwinding. Don't do this now. Get the fucking work. Like, this is your shot. Like, you're wasting your shot. Do it now. Fuck you. Like, and that's just going to be my morning. That's going to be me in the shower. That's going to be me brushing my teeth, is get the fucking work. And as soon as I get down to do it, there's a better chance that I'm going to get things done. So, like, when I called you a workhorse, I don't know where that comes from, where you have the ability to sit down and just start working and do it, because we've talked about this before about self-starters. I believe it was our New Year's episode last year about self-starting, right? Just do it. And you have that kind of ability, and I don't know what goes on in your brain to help you get in that mode, but when I open up my script page and I have to do a rewrite, I'm looking at it and I'm going, do I want to do this? And yeah, I do, but I'm just so fucking lazy about doing it. So I need that kick in the ass. And so I felt seen when I saw this movie. It was a real, like you said, cathartic feeling for me of, not cathartic. Cathartic's not the right word for me. I didn't feel so alone.
Yeah.
Does that mean, I don't know what the word is
Yeah.
for the opposite of loneliness, but that's fine. That's how I felt when I saw this movie. I was like, I felt like I belonged. Like I felt like I had a peer. And he's a famous movie director who's, won an Academy Award and makes movies that he wants now and all this stuff. But as we pointed out to you, he's not exactly a household name, right? When we talked about the artist, like you weren't totally familiar with him when I mentioned him. You knew some of his works, probably through osmosis. Maybe you'd studied them, maybe you haven't. Most people haven't. And me, I could look at this guy and be like, like two people could walk in a room. One of them could be Brad Pitt and the other one could be Damien Chazelle. 99% of the population is going to run after Brad Pitt because they're going to want to selfie with him and talk to him and all that kind of stuff. I'm going for Damien Chazelle because I want to pick his brain some more. I want to talk to him. I want to see if me and him have more in common and how he solves problems that I don't have the answers to yet. And that's one of the things that I have to think about as an artist when I'm approaching my work is maybe I'm not going to be the Michael Jordan, the Steven Spielberg, if you will, of filmmakers, but that doesn't mean that my work and myself by proxy won't be important to somebody in the audience. Do you know what I mean? Like a lot of people, like if you say Frank Darabont, they'll be like, who? I'll be like, you ever seen Shawshank Redemption? Oh yeah, great movie. Frank Darabont wrote and directed that movie. Like to me, like those kinds of people probably are happy. At least I hope they are. But at least for me, like I feel like I can find some kind of completion, not to sound oddly sexual, but in my life goals. And I don't know if that's good or not because we talked about being content being dangerous for an artist. But one of my things that I'm always talking about working through your shit as an artist is I am trying to find people that I can identify with, people that I can relate to, that I talk to, because here in my town, when I talk about stuff like this with you, Rainwater, like if I talked like this about to anybody else, they would just write me off as being pretentious or, my head's up my own ass and it's that ego thing, or, it's just one of those, oh, I'm talking flowery for the sake of trying to look more educated than I am. Whereas these are actual thoughts that I have. And that makes me feel so alone. Like I can't talk about it with anybody. So to see that work on screen, to see that kind of stuff made me feel so much better. Just like how like doing this podcast with you makes me feel so much better. When we have guests come on, people that are, that I don't, and they say things and I connect with them, I'm like, yes, this is what I'm doing stuff like this for. It's one of the reasons why we have like 8 consistent viewers for this podcast, and anybody else probably would have thrown in the towel by now. I was like, oh, it's been a year and a half or whatever, and no one's really listening. I don't give a fuck. I get to talk to you about it, and I'm hoping there's somebody that's listening out there that maybe is getting something out of what we're talking about. I hope you get something out of it. Like,
yeah, no, that's definitely like, I mean, this has been a pretty good conversation because I think it is one of the more crucial. And why I like that movie so much, because it's one of the more crucial themes that comes up for anybody who gets into, being creative, because it's kind of an insane thing to do.
It's and it's a lonely thing to do.
Yes.
Andrew's very lonely in this movie.
Yeah, exactly. He does not have any friends at all.
A point that he makes, and that he's okay with it at that point. And that's something that I think I need to make peace with.
It actionably excludes people who want to be closer to him.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And that's something I've gone through. Like I tell my wife all the time, like my wife gets home from work and she wants to, lay down in bed together and watch a movie or watch a TV show or talk about our days. And, that's the time when, number one, I'm kind of a night owl when it comes to working. For some reason, daytime, I can't do it. Like I feel like I should be doing other things, but nighttime is when I like to work. I feel like I can be most focused at night. Maybe it's because the caffeine starts wearing off and I'm not as jittery. But she doesn't understand. Like she feels like I'm just trying to get away from her. And in a vis-a-vis way I am, but it's not just necessarily her. I don't want to be around anybody. Like I want to go in my little corner in my office downstairs. I want to shut the door, and I don't want the world to be around. I want to work.
Yeah.
I want to focus. I want to, you know what I mean? I don't want distractions. I don't want to do this. And it's a very lonely thing. And like, I remember when I made Digits, one of the reasons why I asked my wife to marry me was because she stood by me through Digits. And Digits was night after night after night of me sitting in front of a computer writing the script. Night after night after night of me getting off set and passing out, waking up and doing the exact same thing. You know what I mean? Like there was no time after for an hour-long phone call to talk about how this and that and this and that and this and that. Kind of like what Andrew talks about in the movie. And then night after night after night of editing once it was done. And then in my free time after it was done edited, like I had to go and scout the movie theater we were going to premiere at and be on the phone with the guy who I had to pay to get the movie in the theater. I had to figure out how we were going to sell tickets out. You know what I mean? Like there was no time for anyone or anything else. And it's a very dark and lonely road for artists. And that doesn't normally get shown in movies. It's always the Hollywood, oh, here's your entourage. And that's the downside is that a lot of artists, the great artists, I should say, have standards that their fellow friends who are artists don't have. And that's the difference between an artist who becomes quote unquote something and someone who just does art and that's just fulfilling for them and that's it. And to me, I'm one of those people who will cut off my right leg to get my art done. And it's very interesting for me to see that represented on screen for once, because I never thought anyone else felt that way.
Yeah.
So this,
sure.
you know, that, like I said, this movie has spoken to me on so many levels, and that's why I just had to push it on you, because misery loves company.
It's a good call for sure.
Anyway, I think we've wrapped around 1 hour and 10, which is our normal mile marker. So we will wrap it up. I have no idea what we're talking about next week, so I can't plug anything, but tune in and it'll be a doozy. Happy January. As to reiterate what our fucking point was this time last year, which was just go do your art. Just get started. I was going to start today, but I made the procrastination decision to clean my office. I'm one of those, you know, I think I've talked about this before, but I'm one of those people that can't work in dirty surroundings.
Oh, that's fair.
It's a procrastination thing for sure, but it's also
I
like
did that earlier today.
Yeah, but you know what though? It's a good way to get started, because once you're in, it's like, what's that expression? Something in motion will stay in motion.
Yeah.
And if I'm starting to accomplish things right off the bat, like when I woke up this morning, my new thing was, all right, I'm going to make sure I brush my teeth every day, mouthwash every day. I'm going to take my protein drink every day. I'm going to take my vitamin drink every day. And then I'm going to work. And then I did all those things, and then I straightened up my office, and it was a nice way to get momentum. The only reason I didn't get any work done today was because right around the time when I got done with it all was the time that it was time for dinner. And then we did this podcast. So I ran out of time. But if we weren't doing the podcast and my wife hadn't come home for dinner with my son, chances are right now I would be face deep in a script, making notes, making changes, getting all that stuff done. So my recommendation to everyone who's listening, first of all, check out Whiplash if you have not already. If you haven't, or you have checked out Whiplash, I strongly invite you to do it again, because it is a movie that should be rewatched, in my opinion. Maybe with a buffer. I'm not so masochistic that I would say watch it back to back, but if you haven't seen it a little while, give it another go. And really kind of draw things from it if you can. It's a good inspiration, I guess you could say, especially from a first-time fucking filmmaker. That was his first feature film.
That's incredible. No, that's an incredibly good first film.
Yeah, it's mind-blowing to me. Definitely better than Digits. Anyway, we will see you guys next week. Take it easy. Bye-bye.
Later.